Tom O'Brien, Department of Educational Studies and Research, and I'd like to thank the Provost, Dr. Denis Wiesenburg, for providing lunch. I'd like to thank the Baptist Student Union for hosting us, and of course the LEC, the Learning Enhancement Center, for organizing this event. What we'll do today is talk a little bit. We have some prepared questions about tenure and promotion. We have a panel of people who have seen the process from various perspectives and have experienced it themselves. And then we want to make sure that there's time throughout the afternoon or the hour or so that we have together to hear from you, because a lot of the questions we have may not be the questions that you have. So please, there's a mic here. We'll try to even move it further toward you so that it's easier to get to, at least for this part of the L, not the other part. So a little bit about the format. Of course, the panelists are here. Dr. Mike Forster in the College of Health, Dr. Kim LeDuff, who's the acting director and associate professor in mass comm and journalism, and John Bishop, associate professor, right? Assistant. Oh, good. Okay. I mean, assistant professor in curriculum instruction and special education. And John's going to have a new chair next year. Okay, so that's the format. We also have the Gulf Coast joining us via Collaborate, Blackboard Collaborate, and they'll be able to get us some questions. And who's going to be handling those questions? Okay, great, Amy. Okay, and so that's the format. Before the Q&A, we're going to give the Provost a chance to talk a little bit about tenure and promotion from the DOME perspective. Denis?
Okay, well, thanks, and I'm really pleased to see that that there are many faculty here that are early in their time with Southern Miss, as well as those who might be going up for tenure in this next coming year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the tenure and promotion process and expectations. And I may just say the word tenure, but you can read that as tenure and promotion as I go forward. Chapter 9 of the faculty handbook is something that you should commit to memory. It covers the tenure and promotion process at the university. And one of the things it says is that the award of tenure is a privilege. It's not a right or an expectation of every faculty member. It's something you have to earn. And the handbook says tenure is awarded after a thorough review that acknowledges the faculty member's professional excellence and the likelihood that the excellence will contribute substantially over a considerable period of time to the mission and needs of the university. Some of the key words in that are excellence and over a considerable period of time, because tenure is a decision to allow you to continue your employment at the university as long as you're a productive faculty member. And it gives you security, and tenure also gives you ownership rights in the curriculum that you're a part of. So it's a very important process to the university. Each university that offers tenure has its own distinct process that includes assessment of professional growth, looking at disciplinary standards, looking at practices and regulations of the university, and also policies of the Board of Trustees, or in our case, the College Board. And at our university, the Office of the Provost is responsible for managing the tenure and promotion process. And as you hopefully know, that process starts at the departmental level, moves through the college level, and then arrives to the University Advisory Committee that then makes its recommendation to the Provost. At each level along the way, the determination by each of the bodies or administrators is only a recommendation. And in turn, I make a recommendation to the President. The President makes a recommendation to the IHL or the College Board, and only the board can award tenure. So as you go through the process, the material you receive is a recommendation, and no one at this university can award any faculty member tenure. Only the board can do that based on the recommendation of the President. And this is all detailed in Chapter 9, and I hope if you haven't reviewed that, you will do so soon after this meeting. Each individual department and college has its own criteria that they use for determining their standards for promotion and tenure. The university also has its own expectations. And I'd like to tell you how I believe I can state that very simply. And that is that a faculty member requesting tenure must provide substantive evidence of excellence in teaching, research or creative activities, and service. Let me repeat that. If you're going to request tenure, you have to provide evidence of substantive evidence, not just evidence, but sustained evidence of excellence in teaching and research and creative activities and service. So if you have one great year in the 5 years you're going up for tenure, that's not substantive evidence. That's temporal evidence. And we're looking for something over a broader time span to assure that you're going to be successful for your career at the university. And if we really want to become a better university, if you think about this, as we look at people for tenure, we should look at the department in which they're being tenured. And in any department, you might have a spectrum of capabilities and faculty from those that are leading their field to those that are just getting by. And if we're going to become a better university, we need to tenure people who are in the upper half of that department. Because if you think about it, if we tenure people that are in the lower half or down near the bottom relative to their colleagues, then over years, the quality of our programs will decrease. Whereas if we tenure people that are in the upper half, the quality of our programs will increase. So if we want to become a better university, we need to all think about that as we're going through the process, and to do otherwise would really be lowering the bar every year. In your application for tenure, the dossier is critical. The dossier is also considered a work product of the university that you're producing. So when you produce your dossier, volume 1 of that dossier, which is your resume, the materials, the letters, etc., that volume 1 will never be returned to you. So you should have a copy of everything that's in that, and you will receive a copy of letters that are sent by the deans and the committee. So you will receive the things you don't have, but don't anticipate that volume 1 will be returned to you. Volume 2 will be returned to you if you're successful in being awarded tenure. But you remember, you have to provide the evidence, and the dossier is what gets reviewed. So you may be one of the greatest teachers in the world, but if the evidence of that is not available to the review committees in the dossier, then they won't have an ability to assess that. So it's incumbent upon you to make sure that dossier sparkles and clearly states your contributions to your university, to the academic community, and to your field. And once the dossier is submitted, anything that you mention in the dossier, such as a paper that you've submitted and you have a copy of the draft, if that paper is accepted, then you will be allowed to include it in the dossier. But anything that hasn't occurred and isn't mentioned in that dossier won't be considered. For example, if you don't mention in the dossier that you're planning on winning the Nobel Prize and you win the Nobel Prize, the committee will not be allowed to consider the fact that you won the Nobel Prize because that was not considered in your dossier. That's a little bit different than what we've been doing, but the faculty handbook is being changed to reflect that. And so whereas you can, if you note that you've submitted a grant proposal and that's in your resume and the grant is awarded, you can include that. But if you write a new grant proposal after you submit your dossier and it's awarded, that won't be included. You have 5 years to provide the substantive evidence that you need. The mechanics of the process: you need to start early, and from the day you're hired, you should be thinking about building the credentials you need for tenure. When it's time to go up for tenure, you should start in the summer before putting your dossier together. The forms and instructions are on the Provost website. The dossiers are due to the department by September 27th. The Provost's recommendations are due to the President March 24th, and you receive notification at each step along the way. Probably one of the most valuable things you can do in producing a dossier is to look at some great examples from faculty who've come before you and been successful. The departments that tend to have faculty with the best dossiers are ones where they provide earlier ones for review, and I encourage you to review those in your department and use the good ones as a model in your dossier. As I said, we hire people with the expectation that everyone is going to be tenured and promoted, and one of the purposes of the meeting today is to help you get a better understanding of what it takes to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So what we're going to do is pepper this panel with some questions, and then hopefully that'll prime you to ask a few of your own. And we're going to jump around here. So this first one I'm going to send to Dean Forster, and it's what do you see as the relationship between annual review and the tenure and promotion process? Everybody here has been through annual review, correct? So let's try to link that with the tenure and promotion process. Mike?
Well, strictly speaking, they are separate processes, the annual review and the T&P process. But the faculty handbook currently uses language, something like unitary evaluation standards, and certainly the ideal that we strive for in the college is to have a lineup of the expectations for faculty performance on an annual basis, for junior faculty, that is, and those expectations in regard to adequate progress toward tenure. So you're not looking at different things. You're looking at the very same three core dimensions, of course, teaching, research, and service, but you're also looking at the same evaluation standards. So if a document indicates, if the departmental document indicates that ordinarily the expectation for a junior faculty is, say, 2 peer-reviewed publications per year, then that is going to be considered in the annual review. You're not going to just look at other issues related to research, maybe how many peer-reviewed conference presentations were done exclusively, and ignore that departmental expectation, which would then perhaps expose the faculty member at third-year review to what would seem like a new criterion being imposed at that point. So they really should be closely linked.
Good. Anybody else want to talk about that?
One of the things that I think is really important is that annual review plays a very important role in your own development in terms of goal setting. One of the things that you want to make sure you do every year is set goals for yourself in each of those areas, in teaching, in research, and in service. And I think that was one of the things, that was sort of a checkpoint for me along the way, is when I set those goals annually, as the semester, or as the year ended, I went back to sort of check my progress and see how I was doing in each of those areas. It's also a very good time, usually it's senior faculty members who are going to evaluate your tenure or your third-year review, as well as your department chair or director. And that's a good time to really have a candid conversation with them and say, hey, how am I doing? What suggestions do you have? If you're concerned about things like, committee service or things of that nature, that's the time to let them know, hey, this is, I know I need to work in this area, or can you give me some feedback and make suggestions for how I can get connected? Because a lot of times when, there are opportunities for service, those are the people who are going to know about them. And if you tell us, then we can make sure that, we think of you when we make those appointments and recommendations and things of that nature.
So setting goals, of course, but then connecting those goals with the people who are possibly, well, definitely going to be doing the review, at least at the departmental level. Good. Let's talk a little bit about relationships at this point. And this one we'll pitch to John. What have you done in the past, or what advice can you give us with regard to finding a mentor, the necessity of a mentor, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, in our department, in curriculum instruction and special ed, we're actually assigned a mentor faculty, and I just had the great luck of having a wonderful mentor. In fact, she's here. I'll point her out and embarrass her, Dr. Phils in the back there. And some of the experiences that were advantageous for me is just simply her wanting the well-being and the success for me. And so simple things like conversations with Dr. Phils about how I might streamline my my tenure and my third-year review process. You know, what am I doing in my academic career that is really thinking about the long-term goals that I have? So am I taking on too many different things that might be barriers to getting publications in? And then more importantly, just some very specific things that Dr. Wiesenburg mentioned, somebody to look at a mentor dossier. I mean, just the formatting of a good, organized mentor dossier was super helpful for me. Let's see if there's any other things that I had that were important.
Well, John's looking. What would you do in the case if you didn't have somebody to look for a mentor? I know that there are some departments where there's a big gap, say, between the assistant professor and one full professor who's been pulled into another role at the university. Where would one go, Mike?
Well, I would encourage whether one has a mentor or not formally assigned, faculty want to connect well with the chair of the department, obviously, to sync plans with needs of the department and the expectations that the chair has. The chair is going to do an independent review of any evaluation process, and also with the tenure committee, because those are the senior colleagues who will have the first crack at review and the responsibility of doing the first review at the departmental level. So those are typically senior colleagues, chair, tenure committee, who can provide a good bit of direction and support and advice. And again, whether one has a mentor or not. And then it's important to pay attention to the consistency of what kind of direction and advice one is getting, because maybe in the best of all possible worlds, everybody lines up nicely, and maybe that's not the case. So you want to be aware of any divergent expectations that those senior colleagues might have.
Yeah, just to add one thing, for me it was helpful for a senior faculty who knew the departmental guidelines. So our department has a document that sets forth the guidelines for tenure and promotion in a very specific way. And just to be familiar and to have conversations about what our departmental guidelines are, it was just highly important for me.
The other thing I would say, and I jokingly say I have my own personal board of advisors, and basically these are some of my colleagues, not just at this university, but who are also at other universities. That, you know, different schools have different requirements, but at the same time, in going through that process, it's nice to have people that you can bounce ideas off of, who are willing to review some of your materials, who'll give you honest feedback. I mean, all of us need, you know, people around who will be honest with us and, you know, not just tell us everything is wonderful, but say, hey, you know what, you need to brush up on this, or maybe you could state this better. So it's real, you know, I think even at conferences, if you meet colleagues, or even you know, colleagues that you were in graduate school with who are sort of in the same process as you, I think all of those things would be helpful, or all of those people, you know, would be helpful as people that you can talk to as you're going through that process. So create your own personal board of advisors.
And I think one of the themes that we see here is balance, you know, and then trying to get feedback along the way about how you're balancing these three responsibilities, right? Teaching, scholarship, and service. And lots of times when you're trying to balance it on your own, you may not have it just right, and the earlier you can, you know, get straight feedback about the balance, the better off you'll be. And again, annual review as it connects to third year review, as it connects to to tenure and promotion. I want to reiterate what the provost said about this structure that we have, where you're reviewed twice at the departmental level, right, by a committee of tenured professors, and then by the chair, and those are independent reviews. Then you're reviewed twice at the college level by a committee of faculty and by the dean. And that same process goes to the provost's office, where the provost conducts an independent review alongside the university faculty committee. And these are all recommendations that go up the chain until they reach the president's desk. The president makes a recommendation to the IHL, and then the IHL grants the tenure. So it's a parallel process as it goes up. It's all recommendations, but at each level there's a vote, or there's a recommendation, positive, mixed, or negative. And so that's important to keep in mind. And I think, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, I think the reason we do this is because faculty may have a different take on an application than the administration, right? And we don't expect everybody to think the same, although we do expect some consistency in the overall process. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Denis?
The faculty assessment is probably the most important in the process, because those are the colleagues that can more effectively assess the scholarship. In my field, there's a wide variety of journals that faculty publish in. Some are very difficult to get papers in because they're in high demand. Others publish everything that you send to them. And when you get to the college or the university level, the committees don't recognize that. So they are looking at process and numbers and making sure the process was fair. But it's really at the departmental level where your colleagues can assess not only the quantity of the material that you're providing, but the quality of it as well. And you do get a report of the votes at each of the levels, along with the recommendations of the administrators and of the committees.
Great. And now a nuts and bolts question for Kim. How do you keep all this stuff organized?
That's, I think, probably the most difficult thing, because if you think about doing an annual review, it's hard to remember what you've done for 1 year, let alone 3 years and then 5 years. And so I think there are different ways to do this. One of the things that I actually took a pedagogy course when I was in grad school, and one of the things that they recommended was to literally keep a box. I had a basket that sat on my windowsill in my office, and every time I had a committee meeting, received any sort of email that sort of made it clear that I served someplace, papers that I wrote, literally put a copy of it in the basket. And that's what I would do. And then at the end of each year, when you do your annual review, sort of cataloging that information. Now you can scan it. When you have things, just create a file where you can scan those things and put them on your desktop, and just sort of keep it as a running file of all the things that that you've done. In the end, there are certain guidelines in terms of the thickness of the binder that you can use to submit your third-year review and your final dossier. So you want to make sure that you have that material in manageable conditions, so that you don't have papers and things falling out of it in the end. But that's what I would recommend, is literally keep a physical space someplace in your office where you are keeping track of all of those documents. The other thing is thinking about what items you want to include in there. Of course, teaching, your syllabi every semester, any special activities that you do with your class, if you do service learning or have any type of special projects, make sure you're keeping copies of those, to keep on file. When you think about research, obviously conference papers, reviews that you've done, conferences that you've participated in, the conference program, if you have to keep that. But making sure, or just make a copy of the pages that indicate you were present and participated, but make sure that you're keeping track of all of those items, because it's amazing how quickly you'll forget some of the things that you've done over the course of a year.
Yeah, I like to say that the process turns us all into historians. You make your case, but then you point to the evidence that supports your case. And I think that's really important. I think it's also good advice that you do it continuously. I mean, one of the hardest things that can happen is if you've served on a dissertation committee, but you knew it was in the spring and you kind of remember the student's first name, and then you're trying to reconstruct that, you know, it's much better if you can go to a file that says service 2012, or it says advising 2012, and then boom, pull it out, and then you've got it, and you've saved yourself a lot of dissonance.
Tom, let me add one thing to this, and one of the important parts of the dossier is your statement that you provide to help the different committees understand the successes that you've had. Because you'll have the publications, you'll have your resume, and copies of your papers or examples of creative activity and scholarship. But you have an opportunity in the written statement to highlight the things that you want the committee to focus on. You know, and you need to point to evidence of your successes. Or if there's something unusual, like there was a year that you didn't get much done, explaining that and not leaving it up to the imagination of the committee to come up with their explanation of why this happened or something. So it's your opportunity to expand on the material and help focus the committee to see the things that you feel are important and for them to consider.
An example of that, lots of times you're working along on your scholarship or on your creative work, but it hasn't hit the press, right? And then you can run into a situation where a bunch of things are published at one time. I refer to it as the popcorn effect. You know, it's like popcorn. There's heat going into the popcorn, but it all starts to pop at once. Well, don't leave that to your committees to figure out. Explain that in your narrative that you know you've been putting heat into these projects all along, and that's why a bunch of things came out in 2014 and nothing came out in 2013. That kind of thing. So.
And I think it's also important to note there that at any even once you submit your dossier, if at any point something changes, so for example, if you have something under review and you know it's published or you receive galleys or something along those lines, and you want to let at whatever stage in the process your dossier is at, you want to let people know, you can submit an addendum to your dossier. So I think that's an important thing to note as well.
Let's get Mike back in the mix.
Well, let's start with my making a comment on some of this. If there's one thing that I think applies to everyone, no matter what area they might be, in the particular content of the dossiers, it's a point that Dr. Wiesenburg was making earlier, and that is you want to make your story clear. You want it to be transparently obvious what your academic story is. You don't want to make your evaluators work hard to figure it out, right? You'd never want to do that. I have literally had faculty, usually at the third year review point, looking at the dossier and finding confusions in it, tell me that, well, these are smart people that are looking at my stuff. I'm sure they can figure this out. Well, no. You don't want them to have to figure it out. You want to be very clear.
Good. And maybe we'll go down the line. I know one of the questions always comes up, you know, when you think of a pie chart. How do you balance this? What percentage goes toward scholarship? What percentage toward teaching? What percentage towards service? Now, you can tell me that's the wrong question, or you can try to answer it. And we'll start with Mike.
Percentages?
Yeah.
Well, I think, as has been referred to in an earlier point, also, the departmental document is a key document. The expectations that lay out the expectations for tenure and promotion is probably the most important reference in this entire process. If you have not seen that, and again, I've occasionally had the experience of talking with someone at third year review point who says that they've never seen the department document, or they've never studied the department, but they're aware that there may be one. This is what the expectations are for tenure and promotion. You don't want to let that happen to you. Okay, if you haven't studied, if you have started this year and you have not studied your department document, you absolutely want to do that. And discuss anything with your chair, with your tenure committee that's not clear. Now, those are living documents, but there should be an existing current document for every department on this campus, which at some point in the not-too-distant future was filed with the Provost office. So every department should have one of those, and you should know what's in it. So that would be the primary source of if there's anything that's generally expected in the way of what we in social work expect in the way of, the proportions of effort, it would appear there. Now, having said that, I think on an annual basis, it's not uncommon as part of the annual review for there to be some negotiation about what, in particular over the upcoming year, will be the load of a faculty member. There may be a reduced teaching load, for example, precisely so that some major funding proposals can be developed, okay? And that should be very clear in the annual review document, and then reviewed how that, say, additional reassigned time was utilized in the year. Was it used appropriately, and so on. And I think that is part of the reason why the dossier does include each annual review. So there is a possibility for evaluators to look at that and see whether there was any modification of what the general expectations are.
Yeah, and maybe taking it from the other side, the provost mentioned that we have a mission at the university, and we are a research university. So, one question is, can I be really strong in teaching and service, but not be much involved in research? And I'm going to just give you a quick answer. I think the answer is no. Any comments?
Yeah, my comment is that we expect all our faculty members to be great teachers. And we have a lot of great teachers that do no scholarship at all, no creative activities. We call those instructors. And for tenure track faculty, there's the additional expectation of excellence in scholarship and creative activities. And that's what gives our university its distinction, in addition to being excellent teachers, is the scholarship of our faculty. I mean, we're known for our Center for War and Society and the great people that are there. We're known for our nursing program and the nurses they turn out. We're known for many things, and the faculty that are driving those programs are at the top of their fields, and they're recognized by their colleagues for their scholarship. So teaching has to be done well, and the importance of scholarship can't be underestimated. I would say in most of the decisions for tenure where the people are not recommended, it has to do with either the quantity or the quality of the scholarship and creative activities, because we have great teachers throughout the university.
One for John. John, what experiences, do we have a question? Yeah, sure, Joe.
Related to that, Dennis, is the notion of external reviewers, because not all departments engage the external reviewer process. We do. We think that's very valuable.
Yeah, the question was, what about the role of external reviewers? And many departments send the resumes and material out for external review, and then receive letters back from colleagues in the same field around the country to do perhaps even a more qualified assessment. If you only have one faculty member in a particular field in your department, you might reach out to others for additional information. Many departments do that. At the promotion to associate professor and for tenure at the full professor level, it's required of you to have external letters supporting your work.
So again, go read your department's guidelines. Psychology has that requirement, other departments don't. So go and take a look at that. Let's see if we got one for John here. What experiences have you found to be advantageous in developing a productive research agenda?
Well, I think the first thing is just collaborating with people that I work well with. So finding people that, number one, I share an interest with, but possibly equally as important, someone that I admire as a researcher, or somebody that I know has published and knows the publication process well. Somebody that I've read their writing, so I'm familiar that they can write and that we could make a good team together.
And is it always somebody here, or could be a colleague at Georgia or something else?
Yeah, so that brings up a question that's really interesting to me on our list here. So working with colleagues from Georgia, which is where I came, was one of my publications, but I wasn't a first or second author on. And so in our departmental guidelines, there's less credit given for that authorship, even though it was a productive research project for me, and I worked really well with these colleagues. Turns out it doesn't have very much value in terms of the point system in our department. So that was a lesson learned, spending, in a lot of time with what I considered to be a really engaging, exciting research project. But the authorship was something to consider there.
So in collaboration, author position
Matters.
and that's a place to look for that is in your departmental guidelines. Of course, some department, I know that some fields, you pretty much are you're on your own. You write a poem, for example, and it's not necessarily a collaborative effort. So it varies from field to field in terms of collaboration, but I think it's important to kind of weigh those things as you go. Kim, do you want to talk a little bit about collaboration?
Sure. I think that, again, I've been fortunate to collaborate with some people within my program. And I think that's very important. Also, again, a lot of the work that I've done has actually been through connections that I've made at conferences. And so I think, again, that's a good place to network with people. And, and a lot of times, and you note this, if you submit to the same divisions at these conferences, you get to know the people who are familiar with those divisions. So if you have common interests, very often, that can lead to projects that you can work on. Another thing that I think is very important, the type of research that you do. For those of us who are qualitative researchers, a lot of times when our research goes to, and a lot of times when you're doing research, rather than journal articles, book chapters are very often, how we publish our work. And again, in that narrative, I think it's important that you explain yourself and you explain the type of research that you do, what publications and outlets are available to you, and sort of explain, where your work has been featured. Because I think a lot of times, especially, coming from Mass Comm, when the sciences review this, our publication record sometimes looks very different than other fields. And so I think it's important to remember that you're writing to an audience who may not be familiar with the type of work that you do.
Yeah, or even the outlet.
Exactly.
Sometimes proceedings, refereed proceedings are kind of the top shelf venue for certain fields, library in particular, and that case needs to be made because in other areas, proceedings are really at the bottom of the list when it comes to top outlets. Yeah.
Should we include impact factors, or perhaps how many times the article's been cited, or measures like that?
The question was, should we include impact factors or how many times the authors have been cited? That's a good thing to do, and a lot of departments expect that and others don't. But that's more information that you can provide, and I would certainly, if you've got a couple high-impact articles, you should mention them in your narrative.
Along those same lines, for instance, our impact factors would be different from the sciences as well. Like in criminology, a good impact factor would be around 1.5 to 2.5 versus science, which what's the impact factor of science? Like 20 or
30?
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we include some kind of measure of that, of what a good impact factor is in the field as well?
So the question was, impact factors are different in different fields, and should they include some measure of that? Certainly that's a good thing to do as well, because you want to help the the committees understand the value of your work to the community as a whole, and if there are differences. But to a large degree, we count on the departmental committee to comment on that as well and make those assessments, so the university committee doesn't have to deal with the impact factor of the papers. They have that information from the departmental committees.
And some fields don't even talk impact factor language, right? Some fields don't. It doesn't translate. So those are things that people who are evaluating have to keep in mind as people are going up through the process. Yeah.
I just want to remind everybody, we do have folks logged in from the Gulf Coast, and they can't hear your questions unless you actually go to a mic. You can ask the questions.
Okay.
So if you wouldn't mind.
So go to Mike. Oh, Mike. Okay, good.
On this side, if you can't get to a mic, just let us know and we'll bring one to you.
Good. And at this point, let's go ahead and do that. Are people? Morgan, you got a question?
And we have coffee next week.
We've got coffee. We've got coffee.
Do you have something that came in?
It is a Friday afternoon.
I do have something that came from the Gulf Coast.
Okay. Can you read it, Amy?
Yes. It is on. It's not working. It's the third question that's under relationships.
Okay.
The third question under relationships, they just wanted to know if the panel could address that a little more. About, I've heard that in the final analysis, you're tenured. If colleagues like you or not, if that affects the review process or not.
And I think that was a Mike Forster submission. So we'll let.
I've had people actually tell me that too. That, well, come on, at the end of the day, it's whether people like you or not. And even if that's an exaggeration, and it is, extreme distortion, what is the appropriate role of relationships in the total tenure and review process? Well, this dovetails with the whole notion of collegiality, doesn't it? I mean, it's managing the relationships that one develops in the course of a career at an institution, particularly the relationships with one's departmental peers, but also with the chair, also with colleagues across the university, within the college, within the entire university. And importantly as well, the relationships one develops with students. They're all important. So it's not that, well, it's all about whether people like you, but it is important to cultivate productive, positive relationships of reciprocity, again, particularly with colleagues. So I think there is a genuine, important role for collegiality. It is an expectation. It's explicitly stated, less as a unique criterion as one that is intended to kind of infuse all the aspects of one's work, teaching, research, and services. So it's never going to be sufficient to just be on everybody's Christmas list to get tenure. But it's a valuable asset to have if you have developed a reputation as an excellent colleague and someone who is ready to engage in reciprocal relationships.
Kim, do you want to jump in?
Sure. This discussion sort of reminds me of a book that I'd recommend. I actually teach a course titled Teaching Mass Communication, and one of the books that I have my students read is called Life on the Tenure Track. The author's name is Lang, and it's a quick read, but it's good because one of the things he talks about is he was an English professor, and he talks about his first year in a tenure track position, and one of the things that concerned him was the fact that there was this guy down the hall who, all the faculty members stopped at his office to talk, and all the students were lined up outside because, they just wanted to have time with him, and he felt like, well, nobody's talking to me. I mean, he just really kind of felt isolated there. And one of the things that I think is very important is don't feel obligated to fake relationships for the sake of knowing people. I think there are opportunities to get to know your colleagues, whether it be lunches and faculty meetings, just kind of talking to people beforehand. A lot of times those are places where collegiality comes in. If a colleague is sick and needs somebody to sit in on a class or to, proctor, just little things like that, just to see. It doesn't mean that you have to go to every social or you have to have everybody over or you have to do all those things, but just being collegial in the sense that you're willing to help your colleagues. If volunteers are needed for events and things like that, people notice those things. So it's little things like that I think are important to collegiality. And the truth of the matter is, if you're doing what you're supposed to do, teaching and research are the things that are going to get you tenure. And life is all about personalities. You may not like someone's personality, but you have to give them credit where credit is due if they're doing what they're supposed to do. So I really don't. It definitely is not a popularity contest, because popularity alone will not earn you tenure.
I like to say that there's a difference between friendships and colleagues, right? And if it's not that they're mutually exclusive, you can have colleagues who are your friends, and that's a bonus, right? But at the very least, have colleagues. Be a good colleague. Be a good working faculty member with others in your department. That, again, it doesn't mean that you have to show up at all the social events. It really means these little things that keep the department, the college, and the university functioning as efficiently and effectively as possible. John, any final thoughts about this?
Well, what has come to my mind, maybe a little side note, but I was just thinking about the relationship with students. So another nice dovetail is the opportunity to be research advisors to students. And so I know a lot of times this seems like a service, so to serve on a dissertation committee or to work on an honors thesis as an advisor could seem arduous or could seem time consuming, when in fact it can actually serve your research agenda, or at least it served mine. And this is an interesting topic to me because I think there's some ethics involved here. Number one, it keeps me in the research game. I'm thinking about methodology, and of course I'm sitting next to my qualitative methodologist in solidarity here. But it keeps me thinking about research and how people are doing research. But then sometimes the opportunity comes about where I've got a doc student who has been very excited about their research, and they've earned their PhD, and they've said, would you like to co-author? Would you like to get to this? Would you like to help me through this methodology and co-write this piece with me? And so, of course, the ethics that are interesting in this conversation would be, to me, it's clear that you wouldn't want to try to cherry pick students that you could then co-author with. That seems unethical, but the opportunity sometimes does present itself. And even if it doesn't, just the opportunity to be in relation with people who are excited about doing their research is advantageous.
Good, thank you. I know Kim made a book suggestion. I'm going to have one for you. It's a fun read. It's a book called Straight Man by Richard Rousseau. It might give you some other insights into the, maybe not the tenure and promotion process per se, but the professoriate in a comical way. So,
I have a couple of follow-up questions from the COs.
yes.
Okay. Going back to the relationships, I'm going to go ahead and ask both together because they kind of feed off each other. What about Coast colleagues and their relationships to Hattiesburg colleagues? We have limited access, so we may have great Coast relationships, but limited with those in Hattiesburg. How is that evaluated? And then another person says, yes, there is a difference between popularity and then knowing something about you.
Good. Let's take the first one and kick that one to Mike, because you've got programs on the coast.
I do have programs on the coast. Unfortunately, at the moment, I actually don't have any tenure stream faculty on the Gulf Coast. But in general, I think the question is a very good one, because we have to deal with this distance aspect, we have to deal with the reality that it is more likely that, that the colleagues on the coast are going to see one another frequently. They're going to spend more time together. They're going to interact in service, much more likely even across disciplines, perhaps much more so, and particularly in a small college like my own, where there just aren't that many faculty at present on the Gulf Coast. So it means that everyone involved, I think, has to be mindful of this and make the efforts to connect within the department, because we think in terms of unitary departments in the College of Health or schools, in that there is not, and we have, I'm looking at some of our HPNR colleagues, we have one of our programs on the Gulf Coast that is in human performance and recreation, but we don't think of that as the Gulf Coast Sport Coaching Education Program. And then we have a separate Hattiesburg Sport Coaching Education. No, we have one sport coaching education program with colleagues on both campuses. So it's a reality that they're in different places. They're not as likely to interact as commonly, but we need to think in terms of things like joint faculty meetings where everyone comes together, or opportunities where it's appropriate for faculty on the coast to join colleagues in Hattiesburg and vice versa, Hattiesburg traveling to the coast for events and so on, to make sure that that interaction does take place.
So I'm hearing many campuses, one university. And maybe Denis can
Yeah,
speak to that.
I can comment on that a little bit. And, it's 75 miles or so from Hattiesburg to the campus in Long Beach and the campus at the Stennis Space Center and maybe to Keesler. And the road takes about an hour and a half to drive. And that's a challenge for having people interact with each other. When I was a dean, I had a fisheries faculty that were 1,000 miles apart, and there were no roads. One was in Juneau, Alaska, and the other was in Fairbanks. It was one department, and they learned to work together as a singular faculty, and it took extra effort to do that. All of the faculty meetings were by distance delivery. Their seminar every Friday was broadcast to both locations. And so if you're going to make that work, it's incumbent upon everyone at both locations to make it a singular faculty at multiple locations. I know it can be done because I've seen it done with greater distances than we have here. And you have to have both people at both locations making that extra effort to assure that everyone is working as one unit. If I were a junior faculty member on the coast, and I was an untenured faculty member on the coast once, I would make sure that I had regular interactions with people in Hattiesburg so that they would know who I was and what I could do other than just looking at the paperwork that showed up every year during the evaluation period. And so it's going to take additional effort, but it's important to do.
I was a regional faculty member at Ohio State. I was on the Mansfield campus for 8 years. And the advice I got was to have a presence in Columbus, right? And that meant being there perhaps physically, but I think it also meant being connected in other ways. Denis refers to the meetings in Alaska that took place over IVN. There's Skype ways to connect. So there's ways to have a presence without being present, right? And I think that's, it's not the only way, but I think it was sound advice for me and served me well over the years. Good. Let's see if we can get people from the audience. Myron, come on, you gotta jump up to the mic, man. How about you, Mark? Any questions?
I'm okay.
You're okay? Anybody? Question, anybody?
I have a question for the audience. Many of you have been given a copy of a book by Donald Kennedy called Academic Duty. And if there's a good chapter in there on collegiality and working with your colleagues. So there's another, I know all the faculty that came in last year and perhaps the year before received a copy of that book. If you don't have one, you'd like one, just contact my office. Aha, there's one right here. So you can actually tell us which chapter it is on how to get along with your colleagues.
Dr. Eden, what chapter?
I didn't hear the last part. I was
So-
reading about which part of it?
Yeah, which chapter is the one on how to get along with your colleagues in the department? There is a chapter,
Building relationships.
right, yeah.
To build on that, and I think it's in the handout that you were provided, I gave you an example of what's in the document that comes out of my department. This is an excerpt from our tenure and promotion document, and it lays out at least what our department has come to think of as collegiality. And I think it's worth looking at, frankly, because when I joined the department, it was dysfunctional. And so lots of thought and energy went into this page. And I can well, I'll ask my colleagues to say, are we functional these days? Of course, they're not tenured yet. So, but Forrest says yes, so I'll take him at his word. Okay, good. Let's no questions from the audience. Okay, so we're gonna put the pressure back on the panel. Oh, good, Dan.
There we go.
Dan.
The microphone so that people on the Gulf Coast can hear, if that's all right.
Given the state of the current national economics and the squeeze for funding everywhere, and it reaches in academia as well, I know there's an emphasis, I hear it verbally, a big emphasis on grant writing. If your particular tenure and promotion document, if you don't see as much of an emphasis on grant writing, and you know it's important and you're interested in grant writing, but realistically, if you're in a tenure track and you know you're on a timeline and you want to get as many publications that are worth as many points as you can before you do have to go up, maybe some of the members on the panel can talk about that, and I'm sure Dr. Wiesenburg has something to say about emphasis on grant writing, probably.
The new significance on external funding and being grant active, and balancing that with traditional forms of scholarship and creative products.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, what I like to tell faculty is that the most important thing is to do important scholarship, to do valuable scholarship, to do meaningful scholarship. And particularly many of the disciplines in the College of Health, they are applied disciplines that have important impact in the daily lives of people. So faculty should do, first and foremost, they should be focused on what's important work in their field. And it's always important, since you're gonna live with this, it should be stuff that you love. It should be stuff that is genuinely important to you in your work. Many of our faculty come to us, in fact, either after or sometimes midway through an impressive career as a clinician in some area, and now they're moving into academia, so they're bringing that whole set of passions that they have. Having said that, I like to add that it's really great if you can love stuff that can be externally funded. And if you can be in love with stuff that can be externally funded with full F&A, the vice president of research is going to love you. Okay? So we want and we expect faculty to pursue external funding wherever it is possible to do so. In most cases, it is possible to pursue external funding of some sort. It may not be NIH funding. It may be contracts for important kinds of work that has a research dimension for a public agency. But usually there's a way to do that. And of course, we do put a priority, and I would not say for tenure per se, but certainly if one is looking to move, as hopefully everybody in this room eventually will move, to promotion to full professor, then we're expecting leadership. We're expecting people that are doing cutting edge things. And typically cutting edge things do have some source of external funding that can be sought.
Kim, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think one of the mass common journalism, for example, there aren't as many opportunities for us to seek external funding, and usually it would be something that would be at the departmental level, if nothing else. One of the things that I've found, you kind of have to think outside of the box in terms of what contributions you can make. Collaboration, a lot of grant opportunities, they're looking for multi-unit collaboration. And that's one of the places, a few projects that I'm working on right now, one of the things that we realized is with, a lot of these grants, there is the opportunity for publication of information, creating brochures, creating some sort of campaign. And so, we figured out, okay, well, maybe we can have our students collaborate on some level that way. Some of the research that we do, so for example, I study diversity issues in media, and recently I was contacted by the Department of Mental Health because they received a federal grant for suicide prevention. And so I'm working with a group of my students on creating materials to circulate, to create awareness of this campaign. And so hopefully down the road, the students are getting smaller scholarships to do this work at this point, but this is a partnership that I think down the road could lead to external funding for our program. So we have to be a little bit creative and sort of think, again, this is where partnerships are built. This is sort of thinking outside of the traditional box in terms of the research that you do in your field. But very often, those are the ways that, interdisciplinary research is very valuable now. And I think that's a good way to also create grant opportunities as well.
John, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, in the field of education, Mississippi, just generally speaking, has some opportunities for external grants. They're out there to help our state based on statistics, historical statistics of our state. So that can be a fortunate thing to be in that field here in Mississippi. But just looking at our tenure and promotion guidelines from our department, I noticed something that's interesting. There's points that are attributed to securing funding from internal grants, but there's no points attributed to securing funding for external grants in our department. But there is a statement that says candidates for promotion to associate professor and/or tenure must submit one proposal for external funding identified in the proposal as principal, investigator, or co-principal. And so that's interesting to me and leads me to what I think is an interesting question, question number 10 on our list here. I think that's the last question.
Yeah, what relationship does your department guidelines have for tenure and promotion decisions beyond your department?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is actually a question that I submitted. So I feel like I'm in the audience now. And I really would like to just throw this to the other members of the panel here is how are those guidelines in the department? And what you mentioned earlier, Tom, about that parallel structure of moving beyond the department level up the ladder in terms of tenure and promotion.
Dennis?
No, I wanted to comment on the previous question, so go ahead with yours. Want to just jump in?
Oh, the very first question?
No, I wanted to go back or focus a little bit on the idea of externally funded research.
Okay, let's stay there, and then we'll go back to question 10 since
Okay.
it's written down and it won't disappear.
Okay.
Yeah, the externally funded research question, I'm really glad that it came up because I hear this a lot, and Dr. Cannon, the VP for Research, hears this a lot, and we've been meeting with different departments, and we hear that all the emphasis is on external funding. And I think that may have been the case many years ago, but the answer to that question really is a broad spectrum, probably from the English department to the polymer science department, as to how you answer that question. The key is that faculty do research or creative activities and that scholarship is produced from it. And that's really what most departments are looking for. In English, there are very few opportunities for externally funded grants. And you might be a poet, and so you're writing poems, and that's your creative activity. Or you're studying a particular author and going to the library and doing research and publishing the frontier papers in the field, and there's no opportunity for external funding, nor is there an expectation in the department or probably in the college for that. On the other extreme, I'll take marine science, which is my field, where we do research, but to collect the data, you need to rent a ship, go out to sea, and maybe spend 3 weeks at sea getting enough data to write one paper. The costs of that are huge. Some of the ships run, the smaller ones, 10,000 a day, the bigger ones, 40,000 a day. You're not going to go to your dean and get the money for that. You're going to have to bring in external funding. So in the field of marine science, there's a strong expectation. So in the middle, it probably is different from each of the programs, but the key is the scholarship that comes from it. Some departments expect you to have a robust, externally funded research program, or you won't get tenure if you don't. The reason is it's expensive to do the work. You need to be able to fund graduate students on research assistantships, or the program will not be successful if you can't do that. And therefore, that's why the department sets that expectation. Whereas English, where you might have a lot of teaching assistants to fund the graduate assistantships, then the expectation of external funding is much lower. The business school is one I want to point out because Sharon Topping is retiring this year. And if you know Sharon Topping, she's the one faculty member in business that actually brings in external funding at about $50,000 a year. And that's it for the College of Business. And every time I say to Sharon that no one in the College of Business does any research, she always says, no, we do an incredible amount of research in the College of Business. We just don't have the ability to get external funding for it. So there's really a spectrum of answers depending on your program and your college. But there's not just a general expectation university-wide that you've got to bring in external funding, because some departments have tremendous opportunities and some have almost zero. But if the opportunity is there in your field, if there's money available to bring in external funding to support your research, and you're not attempting to do that, the committee is going to notice that. Because if you can bring in external funding, it's available for polymer science or marine science or education, and you're not trying to bring the money in, then you're basically asking your colleagues to share the internal money of the university to support your research.
Yeah, I know another example, the ship example is a great one, but Sabine Heinhersch talks about how she needs to win external dollars to keep her lab up and running and to pay and to keep her GAs employed and in school. So it does vary tremendously across program. Again, the place to look for it is in the document. I'm so glad that John started by reading directly from his document, because that's where you're going to get your clues. And you can see this is a living document, Mike's term, that is probably changing every few years, and it'll change with regard to external funding. So take a look at that. English, be sure to get it from your chair, Eric. See what he's writing these days, or what you guys are deciding on. Just a note back to, no, I already did that. What was, question 10. Question 10. What relationship do your department guidelines for tenure and promotion decisions have beyond your department? John.
Well, this is a genuine question that I put out there. So, I was thinking, I'm thinking a lot about, do I have enough points? I'm looking at my authorship and my first or second author, which is valued in our department. I love the question that was asked about the impact percentage. That's not in my lexicon, so that's a really interesting comment to make. So as other people that aren't in my department are looking at the journals that I'm publishing in, do they know the journals? Do they know, whether they're tier 1? What sort of evidence do I need to include? And I think we've spoken to that a little bit already. But just that parallel structure of going beyond the department, what are the like online publications is a really interesting subject to think about for me. There's some great tier 1 online publications in the field of education, but am I going to meet up with somebody that's reviewing that, may think of online publications in maybe a pejorative, light.
I know this isn't directly related to John's point, but there's an inherent tension between who's in charge of the substance and who's in charge of the procedures. At the departmental level, departments want to have the weight, and they want the college committee to check to make sure all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted. Not everybody on that college committee thinks in those same ways. So there is room for judgment as the process unfolds. And I think that's, it can be disconcerting to you, but I think it avoids what I refer to as checklists, right? It allows for some professional judgment in the process, but it's an inherent tension that exists as your application goes up the line.
Another thing I think is important in regards to that is your departmental committee has to make a recommendation to your college, and then the college makes the recommendation to the university committee. It's very important. So, in making that recommendation, we write a narrative explaining why we think the person should be granted tenure and promotion. And you do eventually get copies of those things, but your committee, I think, should recognize what types of publications and how they are viewed in the field. That's, their opportunity to make that clear as it moves up the chain. So I think that's another important part of that process that is hopefully working on your behalf as it goes through.
Good. We'll go to Joe and then.
Well, if I can offer a fairly extreme example of John's question. Let's say that his departmental guidelines say you have to publish 2 articles in that 5-year period. That I would argue that certainly probably would not be acceptable going beyond his department. But what happens in that situation when the faculty member hits that guideline expectation, but there's a disconnect between that departmental guideline expectation and what's expected beyond the department? Fair enough, John?
So like a low bar at the department, and then a different standard.
If I'm not mistaken, that's what you're getting at.
Sure, that's a great example.
I have that same kind of question because we teach a fairly heavy load of 3-3, and then we often teach in the summer because that's when a lot of our students are available. And it was kind of explained to me like this, that the person who represents your college on the other committees isn't there to be your voice. Right. So, and we also have a lot of online journals in the library and information science field, so that you're reliant on your college person to kind of be your advocate. And I guess that kind of goes back to you hope they know who you are and that you've been collegial and that they, have your best interest, and they're there to, because I also had brought that up. I was like,
Good.
Just
Mike?
a comment. I think clearly this is more of a challenge in larger colleges where there's more diversity. In College of Health, which is relatively compact, I have charged the CAC, the College Advisory Committee, for giving feedback to the departments on the quality, if you will, of the departmental document. So if there are things that are not clear, or if there are things that they think could be better addressed, or if they seem to be out of line with the level of expectations throughout the rest of the college, then that's feedback to the chair and to the senior faculty to take a look at that and make adjustments in the departmental guidelines, so that we tend not to have that particular issue where there's a really low standard set in one area and higher standards elsewhere.
And that's a process that College of Ed and Psychology has been going through, where drafts of the departmental document has gone to the dean, it's gotten feedback and put back, and then it goes back and forth. It can take a semester or two to unfold, but I think that's ongoing this year and into the future. Yes.
Hi, guys. Maybe this will kind of touch on something we've been talking about already, but at a former institution, and seeming how there is kind of a correlation between the annual review process and then actually going up for tenure and promotion. So my question is have you ever had anybody on those annual reviews that meet or exceed expectations in teaching, research, and service, and then they get out of the department into the college and they say, oh, no, you're not ready for tenure and promotion. So is there some kind of a disconnect there? Because I've seen it happen, and I've seen it become very vicious, at another institution. So I'm just kind of wondering there.
Mike, you probably have the best vantage point on this.
We never have disconnects in our college.
They're very.
I want to assure
they
you
lack
that as a
diversity,
member
they're
of my
very
faculty.
compact.
I made a note of that. I made a note.
The provost would probably disagree with that. No, of course there have been problems. I think fewer in recent years because we've been more attentive to this. I think where problems are likely to develop is that there's a disconnect built in at the departmental level between the annual review and progress toward tenure. So again, I think that point was made earlier, that ideally those are going to line up. And it's possible because of the way we may do our annual reviews. It's possible that in your department it's just the chair that does the annual review. Or it could be the chair plus 2 colleagues elected by the Corps of Instruction. That may not be the tenure committee. So it's conceivable that they'll be looking somewhat at different things. So I think ultimately, a good chair is going to make sure this doesn't happen. Good senior faculty are going to make sure it doesn't happen. But you're wise, I think, as a faculty member progressing year to year, to be drawing attention to any apparent discrepancy yourself.
I can give an example of this, and the College of Science and Technology has 10 different departments, and most of them have an expectation of a high level of research productivity, funded or non-funded, and so the college also has that same expectation. So there's potential that departments will have differing will assess differently the level of research productivity that they see is appropriate for awarding tenure. And then in that case, perhaps, some faculty who don't have the strongest record are recommended by the department. And then at the college level where the standards are the same and the people are not as close to the department member, they might make a more severe assessment of the same dossier. So that there can be a disconnect. And sometimes those disconnects occur because the people closest to the individual going up for promotion and tenure perhaps don't look as critically as those removed by one step.
Yes, Morgan.
I have a question. Earlier, we were talking about evidence, how it's very important to have evidence to support things. And in terms, one big part of teaching is mentorship. We talked about faculty mentorship, but for those of us who work a lot with graduate students, that's a very time-consuming and rewarding process, but I'm not sure how we provide evidence. I saw the question about thank you notes, and I thought, just guiding someone through getting her first tenure track job already in this first year, I realized I have no evidence of anything that I've done with her. So what would you suggest for evidencing that very important work so many of us do?
Kim, I think that was your question.
Right. I think there are different ways that you can do that. If you, one of the things, I keep a list of all of the committees that I'm serving on and sort of where they are in the process. So once they graduate, I know when they graduated, if I chaired versus if I just served on the committee, that's one way. In the case that you're talking about here, if it was just a mentoring relationship, I think, again, that's where the narrative is important, where you talk about the work that you've done with graduate students and the successes that those students have had as a result of your work. A lot of times, if it's, if you've helped them with some sort of project or publication or something along those lines, as long as you note what the project was, where it was published, what your input was. I think all of those things are important. Thank you notes are great, but don't solicit those necessarily. I think a lot of times students don't even realize it when they do it, but off the cuff, I can think of examples where it's like, oh, I'm so glad you made me do such and such in class because, on my internship, I'm actually using this skill. Or, sometimes they'll just send you an update of where they are and what they're doing. And so a lot of times, I'll just copy and paste those if they're in an email or something like that. But I think those things are important because it indicates, that you've had student involvement and that students appreciate the work that you've done with them. So I think that's useful.
Yeah. And I think, if you believe in outcomes-based assessment, what you mentioned is a student you mentored and now had a faculty position at another university. And so that's an outcome that's impressive. And when I applied for tenure at the University of Alaska, they asked me to provide a list of all the graduate students that I had mentored and what they were doing now. And my fear was if they were all working at Walmart, I wasn't going to get tenure. And I didn't know where some of them were and I had to track them down. But that was an outcomes-based approach to show that the students that I had mentored were working in their fields, or a majority of them were.
And we had the same requirement at Ohio State. If you were actually working with somebody and they ended up getting a job at another place, you would put that in your file. So it's good.
Unless it was Michigan, right?
Unless it was Michigan. Yeah. Questions? I'm going to ask Joe Omi a question. Joe.
Break in with the format, Joe. Don't let him do that.
Joe, what are some of the similarities and differences of going up for for promotion to associate versus going up for promotion at full?
And in the Department of Psychology, it's essentially the same. The external reviewer letters, the same development of your dossiers. It's essentially the same for us. So for me, it was nothing different.
And in terms of somebody's agenda, their research agenda, would you expect it to be further along?
Exactly. Further along, expected to have external funding, either support of graduate students or some agency funding. So essentially the same for us. And I think that's the stamp that I could put on the current processes in the Department of Psychology as well. Same process.
Kim, you want to speak to that?
I want to pose a question. Okay. How does administrative duty fall into that going from associate to full?
Administrative duty as distinct from service?
Well, it's part of service, but as we said before, as someone once told me, no one gets tenure on service. I'll put it that way. And not to say service is not important, but the point being that research and teaching are most important. When you move into an administrative capacity, the majority of you spend a lot of time at service. So how does that weigh in the process when you go up?
Well, I was full before I entered into an administrative role in terms of a departmental administrative role. Prior to becoming full, I was director of a clinic, so that still had administrative responsibilities, but was considered part of my program responsibilities. In terms of it, my personal statement with regard to departmental administrative roles, particularly as a chair, one, I would never be a chair if I wasn't full. I think that's a fairly safe statement that most people would agree with, because it prevents a lot of issues, I think, from potentially coming to the table. For those who are not full in our chairs, it has no disrespect intended. So just bless your hearts, I would say.
None taken, thanks.
Well, we have a lot of associate professors who are chairs, and actually I was an associate professor as a chair. I don't take any offense, though. And
thank you.
We expect our full professors to be leaders in their field, and not leaders in the university, but leaders in their field. So you're bringing recognition to the university, and that you're individually recognized within your field, or your research group is recognized within your field. And I've worked with Dr. Bennett for about 26 days now, and he talks about the term distinction. And so you should bring distinction to the university if you expect to be promoted to full professor. And that's one of the things. And so distinction comes from outside, not from inside. So I don't think there are points for being a chair toward your promotion to professor. It's got to be your recognition, not just within the university, but within the field that you're working in.
And most external review letters that come at that point are coming from people who are distinguished in the field. So they're chiming in on the contribution that you've made, beyond the university walls and to the field.
And I would just offer this: no amount of service activity, administrative or otherwise, diminishes us from the responsibility of conducting research and generating scholarship. So that point is very clear and is made consistently by the university administration. So,
just a little footnote: if you say "bless your heart," you can say anything you want after you say "bless his heart." You can say anything to anybody, and nobody somehow takes any offense to that. Yeah.
Is there a question?
I do have a question for you, Joe, but I'll let you ask a question, and then if we have time.
It's about the external review letters. So it's very apparent not every department requires external reviewer letters. If that is the case and you don't have reviewer letters because your department does not require, how does it impact your review process for associate professor than for full professor? And if the person is moving to another university and they have external review requirement in their department, how does it play a role?
So Joe, this is my question for you. So
external
review letters, yeah. So
personally, we had this discussion in our college. My position, and I think the position of all faculty in the Department of Psychology, is that external review process is critical and very important. Probably again, this is our belief. Probably more important, or certainly equally as important, at the tenure promotion process, at the movement from assistant to associate. We think that there needs to be not only that internal review, but that external review with regard to one's program of research and whether it is proceeding in a line that would have one's work be judged to have an impact in the field. And so that it's almost like a progress monitoring data point earlier in the process, rather than one coming to the point of submitting materials for full professor review and then finding out then that they haven't had a significant impact on the field based on external reviewers' comments. So rather than wait at that point, our perspective is we need to get it prior to that point, so that it gives the individual faculty member another assessment.
Yeah, truth be told, it's another way of looking at the candidate, right?
And it's also a way to verify that we're doing a valid and responsible job in the department. We pass judgment, but we also want to know whether our faculty members would pass judgment at other places. So it kind of is a verification of our internal review process from our perspective. We consider it to be important.
Yeah. Would you feel comfortable commenting on if you have a faculty member in a department that doesn't require the external review, but you, for instance, I'm in the College of Ed and Psych, and so you've got a college advisory committee that highly values that external process. Wouldn't that temper the way in which that tenure and promotion committee might look at an application?
John, that question might be better for someone who served on CAC. I've never served on CAC, so I can't speak to that. I know within psychology it's the norm. That external review process is the norm.
Yeah,
it's a standard.
It's not required. Mass comm and journalism doesn't require external review letters when going up for associate. And I I can't think of any cases where that's, I mean, and I haven't sat on that committee, but we've had people go through without external review letters at that level.
Good. Dennis, any comments about external?
I think we've covered it.
Okay, good. Okay.
Hate to shock you like
There's
that.
a hand back there.
So a couple of people.
Tom, there's a question back.
Somebody from the coast?
No.
Oh, come on over.
In terms of the number, I've heard several different numbers regarding the external reviews. Is it 3, or is it, can you do overkill if you get more than one? And I would like if you could repeat what you said about sending off the dossiers, because one of my colleagues asked me about that yesterday. Because he heard they had to do that, to send it off, but to those reviewers, or is it really necessary to do that?
Well, usually when you're sending material to external reviewers, you don't send the actual dossier. You send the resume, the narrative statement usually, and representative publications. Some universities scan it all into a CD and send you a CD or something like that to review. But one department that I reviewed this year, the candidate going up for promotion had 6 or 7 external letters, and I thought that was a little excessive. It's asking your colleagues to do a lot to have that many, but 3 is not unusual. I don't know exactly how each of the departments does their letters, but when I was a dean, we would ask the faculty member for some recommendations, and they would give us 3 names, and we would ask for letters from them, and then we would pick 3 people that they didn't ask and ask for letters from them as well.
And in most cases, the external reviewer will look at scholarship. They're really not in a position to look at service or teaching. They're not on campus to evaluate those in any significant way, but they can read your publications and then do an analysis on that. 15 minutes. Yes. Yeah. Only 15 left.
My question is related to service and what the university considered to be service as well, in terms of on campus or to your scientific community. One case in point is where you're asked to review papers for your colleagues, and in my field, I would say I get at least, right now I have 3 on my decks, and so this is recurring. And at the same point, I don't get the impression from my department that it's important. But for me in my field, I know that it is important in order for collaboration with my colleagues, because I can't keep rejecting these. So I don't know where it fits.
Right, the different types of service to the institution, which could take the form of service to the department, to the college. And then you're saying, what about my service to the profession, and how is that way? Well, can I jump in? Oh, no, I'm going to kick this to Mike. I'm only the moderator. Mike.
Would you like me to respond?
You can jump in.
I would say that the norm, the experience within my college is that we're looking for both types of service that you reference. Certainly there's the university citizen type service to our own community. And then there is professional service, whatever the discipline happens to be. Now, I'm actually concerned that junior faculty take on too much service. And what we try to do, what I hope chairs do with intentionality, is, in a sense, limit the amount of service that junior faculty engage in until they become well established, until they have their teaching well launched, until they have their research agenda well launched. So a typical pattern might be for there to be, in the initial phase, the first couple of years even, departmental service only, and then moving toward college, and then possibly, and I think most of our requirements for university committees require 3 years of service, which typically is a period after which someone coming in with no credit toward tenure will have completed third-year review, or the pre-tenure assessment at that point. So now we know they've been renewed, they're making adequate progress toward tenure. So serving on the faculty senate, academic council, graduate council makes more sense at that point. It's a little bit harder to give too much in the way of specific, guidance around, from my level at least, around the disciplinary service. So that's generally left up to the departments, and some weighing of what, is valuable, what is and isn't valuable is really important. I think the example you gave of reviewing manuscripts for journals, I tend to look very favorably on, because not only is it an important service to that discipline and colleagues in that discipline external to this university, but often the reviewer learns a great deal about the process of publication and critical review and so on and so forth. And you usually have a good bit of discretion as to when you do it. Like you don't have to be running to meetings every month in out of state or something like that.
And to follow up on that, if you're getting papers to review, if editors from the major journals in your field are sending you papers for review, that means they value your input, and that is a validation of your scientific contributions or your contributions in your field. So you're both creating service activities in helping your department understand that these editors or these funding agencies value your opinion, and that helps validate your case for tenure.
Now, in the case that those recognitions don't appear in your departmental guidelines, would be the place to begin a discussion within your department about revising those guidelines to get them in there. I mean, if we hope that most departments practice some form of shared governance, and if you see something missing or something that's out of balance in those guidelines, it's really incumbent upon you to, you don't have to be passive in this. You can show your agency and dig in and have a productive discussion. That's just being a good colleague. Like, it goes to this point that you don't have to be in agreement with everybody. You just have to be civil in your disagreement when you're contesting something or challenging something. And I think that's an important part of university life. I mean, the worst thing after dysfunctionality is groupthink. And you don't want groupthink in a university. Yes.
Should we include a copy of the manuscript review within our dossier, or is just a brief, perhaps paragraph describing perhaps the journal article name and the journal title sufficient?
In our guidelines, we want to see the article.
Okay.
But
the article or a copy of the review that we did?
That article that you reviewed, each of those are confidential.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, say it again.
When we do it, for instance, I did a review of an article for deviant behavior. Do I include a copy of the review I did, or just a description that I did it?
No, most of the reviews are confidential, so you only you include the name of the journal and the number of reviews that you did.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Actually, quick comment on his question. I'm serving on several editorial boards, but usually I don't include the actual copy or my review. Again, it's very confidential. So I usually included a letter from the editor requesting for the review or just correspondences. My suggestion, can you create a kind of a website or something we can find the departmental guideline, college guideline, university guideline, all together at one place? I think it will be useful for us to actually get a sense of what we can include or whatnot, even though beyond the departmental guidelines.
It's a good suggestion.
Many universities do that. They actually have the approved guidelines for each of the programs on the Provost website. And I actually made a note earlier that would be a good thing to do.
And just to follow up on your first suggestion, when I review articles, I usually get a thank you email. So that's what I would print out, or that's what I have printed out to use as evidence. Again, we're all historians when it comes to tenure and promotion. And I'm a historian.
This is a somewhat random comment, but I think it applies to this dossier formation process. I have yet to talk to a faculty colleague going through this process who doesn't say something to the effect that I had no idea how long it was going to take to put all this together and make it look good. And I think the number one reason that sometimes dossiers come through and they look rather ragged, which you don't want to happen, is because of the underestimation of the time it takes to do it and to do it well. I'd go back to one of the points Kim made much earlier about the collection of materials. So you want to have a good collection system, and you want to be assembling those materials, and the annual review process is a good way to, on that periodic basis, to be selective about what is appropriate. You know, as you're going along, you may be tossing a lot of things in that basket or in the service file that you're not going to even include for an annual review. Okay, so you don't have to include each and everything that you did, but those that are important and really tell your story. Same thing is useful when you start approaching that pre-tenure assessment point. You want to start quite in advance of the due date for that dossier to be submitted to your chair. And just to take the time to make sure that you do tell your story well. The statements that have been referred to a few times, that you present that help to point out what are the highlights, what are any possible confusions that something may not look right, let me explain that. To make sure that all that stuff is quite clear and that it just makes it easy for the evaluators to move through your materials and understand what your progress has been.
Teresa.
Yes, since we're a green university, have you thought about having e-portfolios?
Yes, we have.
I have a couple of things from the Coast. First, someone asked if, before we end, if Dr. Wiesenburg would mind going back and reviewing the timeline and dates that you did at the beginning. And then the other question is, someone wanted to know if you can go back and address if it's appropriate to include thank you notes and et cetera from students.
Yeah, the timeline for promotion and tenure is on the Provost website. If you go to the Provost website and look at the calendar, it's on there. The dossiers from the faculty are due to the department on September 27th. The process begins, then it goes from the department to the chair, to the college, to the dean, to the University Advisory Committee, to the provost, and then my recommendation to the president would be due on March 24th of next year. And so those dates change by a day or two every year, but they're always updated on the provost website. They were updated last week, I believe. So that's the best source for the dates. And then, Kim, do you want to speak to the thank you notes again?
Sure. As I said earlier, I think if it's a note that somehow indicates that you've contributed something to that student that's been helpful to their career, to their research, in any of those areas, of course you can include it. I think it kind of functions the same way as when you get your student evaluations. There's a place for them to give you comments, and so sometimes they may not do it there, but they'll send you an email or send you a note, and so I think in those cases it's appropriate. But don't solicit them.
I think we'll call it a day. Let's thank the panelists for their insights.